It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning in spite of the cold weather. I want to take you on a trip down memory lane. I spent 28 years in community colleges, so I know the language between senior institutions and community colleges as far as transfer is concerned. And after leaving the presidency at Northern Virginia Community College, I served as Secretary of Education to Mark Warner when he was governor of Virginia. And his education platform was to develop statewide articulation agreements between senior institutions and community colleges. And he didn't tell me that till after I had agreed to take the job. If he had told me that beforehand, I might not have done it because there was enough push-pull from the faculty at the two types of institutions that I did indeed earn my pay. So, but they do now have statewide articulation agreements. It's always interesting and trying to get a businessman who turned politician to understand the language of higher education and the fact that faculty much prefer listening to other faculty than they do bureaucrats. Was a challenge for him, but we got it going, and I'm pleased to say that those articulation agreements are still in place. But this is not a highly academic kind of presentation. If that's what you're expecting, grab your breakfast and go back to work. I want to take you on a trip down memory lane from when you were in college compared to the students of today. I know, for some of us, that's a long trek back. But we were generally prepared to go to college. We had taken college prep kinds of courses. We had academic advisors who helped us navigate the process. We got to college and everybody was Dr. Somebody, and we thought they were next to God. Oh my goodness. Some of my faculty wanted me to call them by their first name. I said, no, I can't do that. You know, you're a doctor, whomever. After I got my doctorate, it's like, please. I was saying last night, you know, for 1 week, I had everybody, including my then husband, call me Dr. Wheelan. For a whole week, I would not answer them if they didn't call me Dr. Wheelan. And then after that, it was please. And I seldom today introduce myself as Dr. Wheelan. My name is Belle Wheelan. I happen to have a doctorate. Unless I want a reservation in a restaurant or, you know, on an airplane or something like that. Most of them lectured but never used notes. I mean, they were just brilliant people. After I became a faculty member and taught for a while, I recognized the fact that, you know, because you do it often enough, it just rolls off your head. You don't have to use your notes at that particular time. But, oh my God, we were so impressed with these people. They were experts in what they talked about. We never questioned anything they said. We believed it all perfectly. There wasn't a lot of technology at that point, however. They were still using overhead projectors and 16 millimeter projectors even, you know, at that particular time. But they were more interactive than I had been accustomed to in the high school that I had attended. They really wanted to know what I thought, and you couldn't hide in that particular class because they wanted to know, well, you know, what do you think of that, or how did that impact you? That was new and different as well. So we kind of I had to have a change in my own thinking. As I moved up into administration, I had faculty complaining about students, you know, not being engaged and stuff. I reminded them that in May, they were still asking for bathroom passes in high school, and yet now you expect them to be adults in August, you know, able to navigate the system and stuff, and it just kind of doesn't happen that quickly. They were approachable. We even had night classes where we'd go out to a restaurant to have class or meet for drinks after class. I mean, this was a whole new environment at this particular time. The one thing that was constant, however, from what had prepared me to attend college was the fact that faculty had high expectations of who I was and what I was going to do. They did not label me for whatever, you know, from wherever the label came when I walked into their classroom. They said, this is a student who is academically prepared, you know, who can take this work on. I was sharing with the folks at dinner last night that when I taught, my first teaching assignment was at San Antonio College, which is a community college in Texas that had about 20,000 students and 500 faculty, and among the 500 faculty, 5 of us were Black. And because this was 1974, yet we were still Black at that point. My grandmother was colored, my mother was Negro, I'm Black, and my son's African American, so it's hard to keep up. You have to kind of pay attention to the history at the time. But we were still black, and we were 5 black faculty among 500. And I had a colleague from the reading department. I taught what was called Developmental Psychology, which was really a personal counseling kind of course. It was a tell me what you want to be when you grow up and I'll help you get there kind of course. And she taught developmental reading, and she came to me and she said, I hope this is not inappropriate, but I don't know whom else to ask because there's so few of you here, but I have a black student that I'm trying to help, and she just is resisting me all along the way. Any ideas on what I can do? And I said, well, you're probably the first white person who has ever showed an interest in her, and she probably figures that you're not real. She said, well, what do I do? I said, tell her, I'm probably the first white person that has ever taken an interest in you, but I really want you to succeed. And when you decide that you trust me enough to, to listen to what I'm saying, then we can move you forward in this reading class. And about 3 weeks later, I came to the office one day and I had 3 yellow roses on my desk to say thank you because it worked for her. There is that level of identification between students and faculty, whether it's male faculty with male faculty, female faculty with female faculty, minority faculty with other minority faculty. There's that sense of kinship and trust that just kind of comes along with who you are when you're moving through life. And if they don't see that or feel some kind of kinship with the faculty members that are teaching them, then you're going to get resistance. You're going to get detachment. For students who are transferring in, there's already that barrier that they're new and different and didn't start there. And so I can understand why they would want to be called Towson students and not transfer students, because that just removes a barrier that is there at that particular time. One of the things that I found was that it is the support staff that run the institutions. Don't ever think that they are there because of you. Faculty members depend upon support staffs to register students, to provide them financial assistance, to tell them where you're hiding when they're looking for you during office hours, to provide tutoring and counseling and all of the support that they need in order to survive your classes. That is true. That was true when I was a student. It was true when I started my teaching career, and it is certainly true in my office today. I tell people when they want to know, if it's, can I come speak? I say, you have to ask Mrs. Belle, and it's confusing in my office because I'm Belle Wheelan and she's Rita Belle. So when you say Belle, we don't know who we're talking about. But Mrs. Belle plans my life. I have no idea where I'm going tomorrow unless I check with her. They have all the keys and all the files. So just remember that when you're not happy with support services. But anyway, they are the people that are the backbone of what it is that we do. When I first became president in Lynchburg, I had a colleague who told me the 3 envelopes story that they tell to presidents, new presidents, that this woman was coming in as president. She was all excited. She had her first box. She was carrying it to the office, and her predecessor was leaving with his last box, and she asked if he had any words of wisdom, and he said, well, I have prepared 3 envelopes for you, and as you hit a crisis, open an envelope. So she had been there about a year, and the faculty started complaining that the salaries in the summer were less than they were in the fall and spring, and accused the administration of not feeling that the faculty were worth anything because they paid them less in the summer. And so she said, well, I wasn't here when the schedule was set up, but let me go back and look. So she went back to her office, closed the door, sat down, opened the drawer, pulled out the first envelope, and it says, blame the prior administration. So surely she went back and she said, as I said, I was not here previously when this pay schedule was developed, but let's put a committee together and see if we can do something, though you understand the reduction in budgets that we've had over the last few years. So she went along, and about another year passed, and the support staff came complaining, said, we are on the front line. Everybody comes to us first, from the switchboard operator to the secretary in the president's office, and yet you don't give us information. We don't know what to tell people, and it makes us look really stupid. So she said, that's an interesting point. Let me chew on that one. I like that term, navel gazing. I hadn't heard that before, by the way. So she went back to her office, closed the door, sat down at her desk, pulled out the drawer, pulled up the second envelope, and it said, reorganize. So she went back and looked at the org chart and saw that sure enough, there was no input or output to any of the support staff. So she formed a support staff association so that they too would have a voice and be able to give feedback to the administration on things that were going on. And then about 6 months later, the students started complaining. There's not enough parking near the buildings. I know none of this happens here. The food in the cafeteria sucks, and the library is not open late enough for us to be able to use it effectively. So she said, okay, let me think about it. And she went back to her office. She closed the door, sat down, took a deep breath, opened the drawer, pulled out the third envelope, opened it, and it said, prepare 3 envelopes. So hopefully none of the administrators have to prepare or any more of those envelopes. My point being that staff members play a very vital role in the education of students and the success of students navigating through an institution. And so as faculty and administrators, we need to be conscious of that to always ensure that they too have information that they can share with students, because we are not always there, but they are there from 8 to 5 most days. Students, as I said, were prepared to go to college. There was that expectation that education was the way out of poverty or the way into middle and upper class. That was just kind of the theme of the 60s. If you want to move, and 70s, if you want to move forward, then you need to get an education, and college was the way. The students that went to school with us were also academically prepared because we had had that college curriculum and we were very competitive with each other. This was the first time that I had ever engaged in a study group of any kind because I was always prepared and did my own homework and stuff, but getting into college where everybody is an A student or a high-performing student, then it increases the competition, and you have to find a way to get through that. That served me well even through my doctorate. When we knew at least 17 different areas to study for written exams, rather than all of us trying to do all 17, we each took an area and did all the research and then shared it with each other. It was back in college as a freshman that I know how to do that. We were also self-directed. We didn't have to have anybody tell us, you need to go home and do homework, you need to spend time in the learning lab. We knew what success was and how to achieve it. The best news was that college at that time was largely male. So my mother, for example, went to college to find a husband. My grandmother was very distressed when she did not come back with one, by the way. She asked, why did I send you there and spend all my money? Today, it is not unusual for institutions to have as high as 60, 65, 70% female students in their classes, even though they're not single gender institutions. So the landscape has indeed changed. Today, faculty are facilitators of learning. There's not necessarily as much lecturing so much and the sage and the stage kind of attitude as there is more discussion going on. We have this expectation that students will read the information before they come to class, and then we'll talk about the implications of it or how to apply it into the real world. I think service learning was one of the most effective ways of ensuring that students understood what they were learning because they could apply what they had learned in the classroom out into the real world. At Northern Virginia, they had a nursing program, and a company donated a mobile health van to the college so that the nursing students and med tech students could go out into the communities. There's a very large minority population in an international minority population in the area, and they're not very trusting of American doctors and healthcare people, nor can they afford a lot of the healthcare. And so this van would go through the neighborhoods, but we realized that there was a language barrier there because going through an Ethiopian neighborhood, we didn't have many students, if any, who spoke the language of Ethiopia or of Chinese or whatever. And so they partnered with the students who were were majoring in those languages to translate the intake form into the different languages so that the folks could at least feel that they were giving accurate information and that the folks who were asking it were really trusting and trustworthy folks because they at least started out in their own language. Again, more application of what we're learning than actually espousing the theories. I still have my note cards from my history class in high school because I'm terrible with names. I will remember each of you and what you had on today, but will not remember any name that anybody shares with me today. I don't know why that is. We all remember things differently and for different reasons, but I don't do names well. So I had my note cards that I would carry with me. We develop specific student learning outcomes and have had to now share them with students because your local accreditor requires that you do. Beth Sobalski, who is the president of Middle States, and I are good friends, and we have commiserated at many times over many drinks, non-alcoholic and alcoholic, about trying to get faculty to help students understand why they have to learn what they have to learn and what it is that we expect them to learn. I have a son who is 34 by the grace of God, because there were many days I threatened to kill him. You know, as a college administrator and especially as college president, you have a child who does not like school. It's kind of difficult to explain. My son loved to go to school. He just didn't want to do much once he got there. We got him out of high school because he found automotive technology and was able to do something with his hands, and even said, you know, if they put history on a bumper, I could learn it. But he took Algebra 2, as is required by folks, and came home one day and said, why do I have to learn all these formulas? I am never going to use them. And I said, you're right, you probably won't, but what you will use is the process of solving for unknowns. He says, well, why didn't they just tell me that? We do not tell students why they have to learn what they learned, or in some cases, what it is that we expect of them. We give them a syllabus and said, you know, here's the book, here are the chapters, here's when the test is, but we don't always tell them what it is in specifics that we want them to get out of this particular class. Now we are asking institutions and faculty to do that so that students can be successful and can understand how one course feeds into another course, for example. This has been very interesting with competency-based education developing today as well, where students don't have to go to class anymore. They can just demonstrate that they have the competencies, but it requires faculty to identify the competencies from each course or each program that they would have to demonstrate that they indeed have those skills. And I think that's one reason we don't have as many competency-based education programs as we do, because that's a tough thing to do, especially when you're trying to narrow down the competencies from this laundry list of whatever you want to do into, you know, 10 or 12 or 15 across the program that will benefit them. Faculty are much more technologically savvy. You've got computers and blogs and their chat rooms and instant messaging and Facebook and all that other kind of stuff that's out there. I've bought a lot of those systems. I've never used any of them. So you all are a step ahead of me. If I had to go back into the classroom, I would have to take an instructional technology course because I don't know how to do Blackboard and all that other kind of stuff. We are just putting in a new data management system in our association based on Salesforce, and so it's been a challenge for those of us over 40 who are trying to learn how to navigate a new system. And the expectations are often different. I travel, we accredit 793 institutions in our region, and I travel to quite a few of them, meeting with faculty and students, and it is interesting to hear some of the faculty lament on the quality of student that they have, because it's kind of like, all I know how to do as a faculty member is teach this curriculum. And there are other things that you need to attend to in order to ensure that your student is successful. For all of my professional career, we have focused on access, making sure that there was an institution into which every student who wanted to go to college could go, whether it was a community college, an HBCU, or Research One, as long as they were out there. Now we're asking the so what question. You're in there, so what? What can you do getting out. And so we've asked you to focus on student success rather than access, not to give up access, but to focus on student success. And that means a different role for faculty. With transfer students, they tend to be older. And so their challenges in not getting to class on time and not being able to do assignments may be different because of jobs that they have, because of family responsibilities that they have. They may be working part-time. It could be because of traffic, having to come from work back out to the campus to school. When online education first came out, there was a major enrollment increase by adult students who could not take off from work to go to school, but could at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when the house was quiet, could indeed get work done. That has kind of leveled off. And many of your colleagues at other senior institutions are beginning to recruit transfer students and deal with adult students for several reasons. One being, my generation didn't have as many children as my mother's generation did. So you all literally don't have as many 18-year-olds from which to choose. They just aren't there. And so in order to ensure that enrollments don't decline to the point that faculty get laid off, they're starting to realize that there are students who will start at a community college generally and who want to continue their educational career, but they can't always leave because they have jobs and family responsibilities. And so all the senior institutions that are near and dear to community colleges are starting to put those transfer programs in and those articulation programs in so that students can indeed continue their academic careers. There are also different states that are allowing community colleges to offer baccalaureate degrees. That's a big deal, and I hear senior institutions complaining, that's just letting the camel nose under the tent, and pretty soon they'll all turn into senior institutions. But so far they haven't. They have put in programs that are high demand programs like BSNs for nursing and business degrees that will feed into fire science and police science so that those folks can move into administrative positions in the police and fire departments and things like that. But I don't know where that's going. Again, when you look at the fact that the majority of students today, when I was in college, 18% roughly of the college population were folks over 25. Today, 18% are 18-year-olds. It has done a complete flip. And so you see the face of your students changing because of the demographics. The staff still have all the answers, though. They still know where to go to get things done, where to find the people who seem to be hiding from them, what deadlines are real. You give them a deadline and they'll say, well, but you really have 3 days after that. How to get financial aid, how to survive college. Today, enough students coming to you are academically underprepared. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do work. It just means that they need some time to catch up. Developmental education has been the stopper of higher ed for a while, and now they're realizing that adult students especially, who may not do well on a placement test, don't do well for several reasons. One, because they didn't prepare for it. Students who are entering college generally stop and take time to study for the ACT or the SAT, but students who are coming into community colleges especially don't know that they have to take a placement test, and so they just show up. Well, I would have to take a remedial math course if I went back to college right now, because it's been too long since I had to do those formulas. But with a little practice, then I could probably just breeze right on through. And so now you're seeing curricular changes where faculty are not offering developmental courses, but they're taking the first part of the intro to math course, for example, and doing a little remediation so that they can then be successful within that one course. That has helped students move through faster. It has certainly helped their self-esteem, so retentions rates are higher because they are being successful in what it is that they're doing. The students are mostly female. I tell male students when I'm doing high school graduation that, this is a great place to go meet the ladies. Used to be a great place to go meet the guys, but now it's a great place to go meet the ladies. They are mostly adult, as I mentioned, and they are largely minority. You all might have a challenge because as I look around the room, you don't look like many of your students. And so you're going to have to find a way to identify with them or to get them, like my reading colleague did, to trust that you really have their interest in mind when they're attending your class. They're still often first-generation college-going students. Even if they're transfer students, they are still first generation, so there's no one at home to help them do homework, to help them understand the registration process. I challenge each of you, by the way, to go register for a class here at Towson one day. If you can I tell students, if you can get through the registration process, the courses will be a breeze. Because we put up so many barriers and send them to so many different buildings. I'm trying to get from the parking garage over here this morning was a challenge for me, and I have, 3 academic degrees and 7 honorary degrees. So you can imagine people who have no education trying to navigate our systems are very challenging for them. But they don't have that support at home. They're trying to do homework, and everybody's going, well, why are you trying to do homework? Why can't you spend time with us? Well, because they don't understand. They've never had to do that in moving through, and they've been very successful. The jobs today are very different than the jobs were for our families prior to us, even our immediate families. All those jobs that you could get just by being physically strong, for example, don't exist anymore. They've got robots to do those kinds of things. And so you're preparing students for a whole new workforce. And when I hear business people say, well, the college students just aren't prepared to come do stuff, I ask them, what is it that you want them to be able to do? Well, if they'll teach them the basic skills of the job, then I can take them from there. And then they start complaining, well, they can't write a report, and they can't read, and they can't do a presentation. Well, you can't have it both ways, son. You want them to have a liberal arts education because that's where they learn how to read, to understand what they're reading, and to write so that other people can understand what they're trying to say, and to think critically and be able to analyze situations, to be able to speak in public when they've never stood up before somebody before. So you can't limit the college educational experience to just learning how to weld or how to do x-rays or how to do whatever those skill sets are. You want them to be a well-rounded person. And then when you mention that and say, oh, well, yeah, that's right, then don't complain that it takes a minute for them to get out of college. You cannot have it both ways. We cannot put them into the workforce when they're not totally ready to be out there. These students are also more technologically savvy, so trying to get their attention when they've got a phone that they'd much rather be either instant messaging a friend or looking on the internet or Facebooking or whatever else is indeed a challenge. So you're going to have to find a way to put their assignments out into that social media platform so that they can still communicate with you. You would think that the assignments would be a lot easier for them, but it's not because they don't know how to read. This is the TV generation. They are accustomed to 6 minutes of meat and then recess for about 3 minutes for a commercial, and then come back for 6 more minutes of programming and then 3 minutes. They're not used to a 50-minute hour as we have in classes. And so if you want them to be successful and to keep their attention, you have to find a way to break up your lectures into conversations on one piece and something else. It is a new way of doing things. Unfortunately, only about 60% of American students graduate from high school, at least in the South. Nationally, that number is 70%. In this region, it's even higher. But we need 2 million more scientists and engineers and 2.4 million more workers in key manufacturing and production skilled jobs. We are not in a position to depend solely upon those students who are coming right out of high school. That's why the adult population has grown so much, because we're retraining people into the new job market. That doesn't mean that they have the skills to do it just because they're older and they've been in the job market someplace before. And so the challenges for them are just as high as they are for the others. We currently have shortages in healthcare and construction and plumbers. There was a spot on the news the other night that the trucking industry that delivers all of our goods across the country has an average age of 55 for truckers. And so they're trying to find how can we recruit new truckers. And what they're finding is that African American women are being recruited at higher numbers. I'm not quite sure what it is that we do. We can cuss out riders better than anybody else. I don't know what it is, but or navigate those big machines around, but they're struggling in so many industries that, again, historically, we've not had a problem getting folks. I mean, if you can drive, then you can deliver goods. People just aren't into that anymore. Students still lack basic skills, though, in math, science, information technology, critical thinking, analytic skills, and writing. I don't know what it is. We blame the high schools blame the middle schools blame the elementary schools, and the elementary schools blame the parents. I think there's enough blame to go all the way around. But it's becoming exacerbated by the use of social media because students are not taking a book to read a book, bless you, and analyze a book. They'll go to YouTube and figure out how to do it. My son and I get into this all the time. If I run into a snag in technology, I'll call him and he'll say, "That's right, you taught me how to eat from a spoon, so I have to be patient with you." I said, "Don't you forget it either, Bubba." But it's and we have conversations and we'll talk. I'll say, "Where did you learn that?" And he said, "Well, I picked it up on YouTube." I'm going, "Reggie, surely your entire education is not dependent upon YouTube. If it is, then you all better get YouTubes together and put out things for them because they are reacting and not interacting with things that are going on in their lives." We also have fewer visas that are being issued. Which means that those students who used to come over here and be educated, especially in engineering, and would stay here, now either aren't able to come or are going back to their own country to build up their own country's infrastructure, for example. And so we've seen a decline in international student enrollment, which has impacted some of the particular majors in which they used to excel. Because of baby boomer retirements, the shortage of workers is going to increase. I'm looking at retirement. I can see it right out there. I don't know what it's going to provide. I'm sure I'll do something, but what I want to do is be a bartender. So that all of you who are still working and are still frustrated can come by and we can sing and I can listen to your problems. But it's getting worse again because the 18-year-olds just aren't there so much. This next generation, my son's generation, is choosing not to have children at all or to wait until their late 30s, early 40s to have children, which means that it's going to be even longer before they get into your classrooms. The expanding global competition is putting a lot of pressure on us to produce students who can compete globally. And even in communities where students don't leave, or when you have adult students who can't afford to leave, they are still working for companies that do work internationally. And so there is that requirement that they understand the other cultures in which they are, with which they are working so that they can effectively get the business done. Our labor market has changed, and it gets different every year. I remember 45 years ago, there was a major nursing shortage, and then we increased the number of nurses, and that declined. And then 30 years ago, that shortage appeared again, and we took care of it. And so there are cycles to a lot of the jobs for which we're preparing students. The biggest challenge we have right now is we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. And so how do you prepare students who, for jobs for whom you don't know what they're going to have to do? It's also interesting that the motivation for students is different. They come to college because they want to get a job. We didn't go to college to get a job. We knew that at some point we'd get a job because our parents reminded us that they weren't going to take care of us forever. But that was not our primary reason for going to college. We went to learn so that we could make the world a better place. And we could do that through, the workforce, great. But today, the students will tell you and ask you, what can I major in that will get me out into the job market most quickly? And that's a different mindset. And it is through that lens that they are participating in your class. They want to know, what can I do to quickly get out of here so I can keep moving on? Also, there's more information today than there was, 49 years ago when most of us went to college. And so trying to understand what is important enough to espouse in a classroom that will still be relevant without trying to get it all in. Innovations in technology have changed the way we do things. And it doesn't have to be an enemy to us, and we can use it to our advantage. I remember at Northern Virginia, I went there in 1998, and they were just rolling out computers for each faculty. And I had faculty who say, I'm not going to use that, I might lose information. And I told them, you don't have to use it, but you better make friends with someone who is, because I'm not sending another paper memo. If you want to know what's going on, you're going to have to, log into your machine. It didn't take a semester for the increase in requests for new software to start rolling in, because they were saying, oh, well, this can do this and this can do that, and this is cool. And so it was a very different time, the initial point of what's going on now. There's an increased demand, though, we do know, in higher order thinking skills. We are convinced that the jobs of tomorrow are going to be higher order thinking jobs. They're not going to be back-breaking jobs or the high energy jobs of yesterday. When Reggie was interested in automotive technology, we used to call that automotive mechanics. Remember that? You could go to somebody's garage and you'd see oil on the floor and all kinds of tools and stuff. You don't see that anymore. Nobody gets their car repaired anymore. You get a circuit breaker replaced. And that's a very different skill set than trying to literally fix a car. And it appears that every career, bless you, we have is going in that direction. It's not so much a brawn kind of thing as it is a brain kind of thing. There's also a big move to try to find a happy medium between traditional higher education and what we need for job skills. And those are coming in the form of credentials that industry is now beginning to offer rather than higher education to offer. And yet those students want a college degree. And so they're coming to you with this credential, asking you to evaluate it into the curriculum so that they don't have to retake classes for which they've already demonstrated that they have the skills. The Lumina Foundation is, in full disclosure, I'm on their board, is also interested in this concept and how much of it is really going on in higher education. Are we really taking those credentials to allow students to use them, bless you, instead of taking a college class? They've developed a website that has every credential that anybody has ever said they offered. They don't know the quality of those credentials, and they're aware that that is a shortcoming in the system. But you have a lot of folks who are now going to that website to see where can I get a credential so that I can at least get into the workforce. That's going to be exacerbated if the government stays shut down for much longer, because people are going to have to go find another job, and yet they don't have the skill sets to do some of the jobs out there for which they are. So what's for the future? We're going to need fewer of you. I'm sorry. But when you look at, credentialing and online instruction and competency-based instruction, we're going to be able to serve more students with fewer faculty. We're going to have more people, I think, who are coming from what I call the real world, who have been out in the rest of the workforce, outside of higher ed, to come in to teach. When you look at the adjunct faculty that you employ, many of them are practitioners in whatever their field of endeavor that are coming back. And so they're bringing real world experiences in order to include it in the pedagogy. Many companies are offering summer opportunities for traditional faculty to come out and work in their industry for a week or two to find out what it is the students are actually doing, so that you can then go back and, if you're teaching writing, you can include ways of doing the kinds of reports that that particular industry does. Or if you're doing math, and you can include problem solving that involves that kind of industry. Because many of the students who are in higher ed are female, then that means many faculty are going to be female. We're finally getting our just due and taking over. We've let you all mess it up long enough, and so now it's our turn. You'll have perhaps less direct contact. You're going to see more and more students either coming in with credentials and not having to stay as long in traditional college, or they're going to be taking online courses more than they're going to be enrolled in an on-campus class. There's going to be an increase in the number of applied courses. We've already seen that. Many liberal arts faculty are including workforce kinds of issues, either as discussion issues so that students can analyze what I would do in this particular situation, or writing assignments or math assignments or science assignments that are directly related to a particular industry. And there's going to continue to be a stronger emphasis on outcomes and accountability. The federal government has clamped down on us to clamp down on you, I guess that's the way to say that, that they're paying lots of money into federal financial aid, and yet they don't feel they're getting their money's worth. And so they're asking us to ask you to help students finish with a skill set that will put them out in the workforce and make enough money that they're paying taxes or else are able to pay back their federal loans. I know that Middle States has institutions in their region looking at the completion agenda. All of the 7 regional accreditors are doing that with their institutions. We gave our institutions a choice of either the traditional IPEDS data, which unfortunately is based on first-time, full-time students, and when most of your students are not first-time or full-time, then it doesn't mean a whole lot. Or the new and improved IPEDS, where they are at least now including part-time students in their calculations, or information they send us annually on the institutional profile, which is also based on IPEDS, or the National Student Clearinghouse data, which includes transfer students. And so those institutions that are large transfer-in institutions can get a better picture of their students, like the data that was presented this morning, because they can track a student from the first point of entry into higher ed until they graduate sometimes later. And we're using that figure as the baseline for our institutions to judge whether they're increasing their completion rates or not. It made better sense to us than setting a minimum graduation rate for all institutions in our region, because all of our institutions are different. And even if I put a 50% graduation rate on as a minimum, I would lose about 40% of my members, because both my community colleges and those institutions that are open door institutions and largely minority serving institutions don't have a 50% graduation rate. So this way we can compare each institution's rates with their own students and see, how they're improving that. So we're all looking at it differently, but it started with a push from the federal government saying, I need to get more folks graduated so that I feel better about the money that we're spending. The staff are still going to have all the answers to all the questions, but they also serve as role models to the students who are coming through, because they too are working adults, especially those who have gone through your educational pipeline and have graduated as well. They see them as role models. If you can work all day and still go to school and still graduate, then so can I, which is a shift. The students are going to be largely Hispanic. They're going to be mostly female. They will be 18 to 45 as freshmen. That's a whole different set. I remember the first class I taught had a gentleman 60 years old in it. I was 22, and it's like, what can I teach this man? But it was a wonderful experience because I let him do a lot of the conversing, so that these students who were trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, he could share some real life experiences that I did not have. There are still a lot of academically underprepared students. They just weren't exposed to the kinds of courses and programs and expectations that you have of your students. They are mostly part-time, so it is going to take them longer. Each of the regional accreditors has to be recognized by the federal government in order for you all to get federal financial aid. And so we have to go before an advisory panel once every 5 years and to show that we're still following whatever it is that their rules are. And they were lamenting about the IPEDS data. And I said, when you look at the fact that most of our students are part-time, They're not included in IPED's data. So if I've got an institution with a 15% graduation rate and there are only 5 first-time, full-time students in the cohort, then yeah, you may only have a 15% graduation rate. But you can't judge an entire institution based solely on that single cohort. And because nowadays, more of the students are adults who are part-timers, then we've got to change the way we're thinking. They are, as I said, focused on employment skills, and there's a greater participation in online education. So how do we respond? We really need to start before they come to us. We need to guide students into non-traditional areas. If there are more women in college than there are men, who's going to be the welders and the automotive technicians and all those traditionally male areas? Even business and journalism have been largely male in the past. We need to work with minority students who are going to be our largest population while they're still in the K-12 system to help ensure college readiness. Some of those service learning programs that you all have should be sending your students back into the K-12 system to help students learn how to read and write and count and think and speak correctly so that they can be successful when they come to you. Develop strategies for student success that ensure that students will matriculate through to graduation. There's a commercial that one of the for-profit institutions has put out where this adult student gets to class 2 minutes after the bell rings and the professor has locked the door. And she can't get in. That always aggravated me, and I said, this student paid for this class. If they only get 48 minutes instead of 50, that's what they paid for, that's what they got. Don't you dare lock a class. Link courses thematically. There is nothing that says you can't have a student write one paper for 2 different classes as long as they're focusing on the subject matter of both particular classes. Or, work together so that if you're talking about 18th century literature, that the history of it and the literature part of it could indeed be linked together thematically. Heaven forbid that we talk across those silos. Promote that service learning because it really does work. Identify expected learning outcomes. Assess whether students are actually learning and use that assessment to make changes in what it is that you do. And make sure that the support services are built in that will support what it is that you're doing. One of the things that our institutions has to do during the reaffirmation process is what we call a quality enhancement plan. This is a project, if you will, in which the entire institution gets together and decides what will be the focus on improving student learning this year. And we had one institution that was concerned because their students' graduation rates were very low, and they analyzed the data from different courses and course grades and things and found out that one of the reasons students weren't graduating was because they weren't passing the basic math course. Because if you can't do math, this was an institution that had a lot of occupational technical programs. If you can't do basic math and you can't pass nursing and machine tool or anything else that has a math base. And so they got together and pulled faculty from all over the college, not just the math faculty, and asked them, what skill sets do your students need to have in order to be successful in your program? And they revamped the entire intro to math class. They trained tutors so that they could be supportive of the instruction that was going on in class. They bought new materials for the learning lab so that when students needed to practice outside of class, they could indeed go in and do that. And the retention rates and the academic performance of those students increased significantly over the first semester. The success was so exciting that the nursing and allied health faculty did the same thing with anatomy and physiology, because that's the weed out course for that particular set of programs. That's the kind of thing that has to happen for students to be successful. All of the faculty have to get together and move the students forward. We can't stay just in our disciplines and just in our silos anymore. This is a digital generation. We cannot be afraid of technology. We have to embrace it and figure out how we can use it so that students, whether we're there or not, are able to do it. Writing papers today is very different than it was before. We actually had a moment of silence when I was at one institution, as they rolled the last card catalog out of the library. I mean, because it was just painful, you know. And when you tell children today, you know, I used to have to go to a building and look into a set of drawers and go through them alphabetically and write down the Dewey Decimal System number and then walk to the back to actually pull down the book. I wasn't going to do that more than once. You know, you can go to Google and you can forget it and then go back and Google it again, but I would have had to go through that same process again. And so we remembered stuff a lot better, I do believe, than students do today because of that. But there are changes that we have not requested, but with which we have to deal, and technology is indeed one of them. Most importantly to me, because I am a social scientist, is understanding the students who are coming to you and what the baggage is that they're bringing with them, and to try to help them navigate a system that may or may not have been developed with them in mind, so that they can feel good about their efforts. They're lamenting because, oh my God, I'm old, I'm 35, and it's going to take me 10 years to graduate. My response to them is always, you're going to be older in 10 years, whether you're going to college or not, so you may as well be going. You know, you can't get away from that one. To understand that there is so much stimulation out there for all of us, and to be able to learn to focus on what's important and to tune those other things out. We're seeing more and more mental health issues. We're seeing more and more students with no food and no place to live. These are not challenges that we had when we were going to college. Those students weren't trying to go to college. Now they are here. They're also not thinking of tomorrow. Not tomorrow long term like we thought, what are we going to be doing in 20 years? They're thinking about the end of the week and how am I going to survive between now and then. We need to provide professional development for all employees at an institution, not just the faculty or not just the support staff. There needs to be conversations about these generational differences. This is the first time, for example, we've had more than one generation of students in our classes. Sometimes we've got 3 generations of students. We've got the old farts like me, and we've got middle-aged folks like you, and then we have the 18-year-olds all in the same classroom that all have different experiences, that all have different expectations, and we need to know how to work through that. We need to understand, if we're sitting at that information desk, that the adults who are coming through are not going to take the same ignoring that we often do of young students when they come to us. They ask a question, they want an answer, and they want a polite answer. They don't want you just telling them any kind of way. We need to identify the expectations that we have of faculty as we do of students, so that faculty know that we expect that graduation rates are going to improve, and not because we're just giving grades, but because we're actually helping students get through. I know that often faculty perceive assessment as an add-on to what you're doing, but assessment is important for the student because they need to know, what items they missed, for example, so that they can go back and relearn those. It's important for the institution because they need to know how successful they're being with students overall. And it's important because you have to defend who you are and your existence to people outside of the institution. We are becoming more and more data users to take some of those item analyses and actually go back and see, how can I explain that differently when 70% of my students miss the point? If you're just looking at how many A's and how many B's came out, that's not going to be very effective for helping students improve. You need to know which one of those skill sets did they miss, and what can you do to help them. I have enjoyed my 46 years in higher education. If I had 46 more, I'd probably hang in there, but since I'm sure I don't, I'm going to go bartend instead. That'll be a lot of fun. I wish you a wonderful semester. I know that things are different than they've been, even for those of you who have only been here 3 years or less, that your students today are going to be different than they were when you first came. For those of you like me who've been here 40 or more, you've seen the changes that have gone on, and I hope I did a good job representing them today. Thank you for the invitation to be here. If you have questions, I'll try to answer them. Well, first of all, some reality therapy does help, and the more points from which that reality therapy comes, the better. So if the counselor is doing it, the advisor's doing it, the faculty member's doing it, their colleagues are doing it. Sometimes students talking to students is more impactful as faculty talking to faculty is more impactful than coming from administrators. And so pairing them up with a student who's in similar situations than they, to help them understand that it took me 5 years rather than 4 to graduate. And it was okay because I was successful. I got no ulcers or hypertension in the process. You know, my husband or wife didn't leave me. You know, I didn't lose my job, all kinds of things. But these are the kinds of things that can happen if you do this. Trying to get them to break it down into smaller chunks is a challenge, there's no doubt about it. And because they are adults and can make their own decisions, sometimes you have to give them the right to fail and realize that this isn't going to work. But again, the more encouraging you can be, and again, the more points from which they can hear this, tends to be much more effective than you trying to do it. Or even if you say, let's just try a smaller load for 1 semester, and then we'll show you how you can pick up, you know, as you're going. It will mean that you have to go to summer school. You may have to take the mini-master class as well. But if you take it in smaller chunks, let's just start with that. If it doesn't work, then we can go back to you. And when they feel that success, then you can probably try it again for another semester. There's no silver bullet answer to that question, I'm sure you know. Or help them rearrange their courses so that they're not taking all the tough classes in 1 semester. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's one.
Got one back here.
It's on. Okay, good.
It works now.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. How do you account for the disparity of male versus female numbers in the student body and in the faculty?
If I could answer that question, I would have written 3 books and, you know, maybe had a Pulitzer. I think part of it is because the technology industry is establishing a greater number of millionaires just by developing software. And so a lot of our males, because they're interested in that kind of thing, are writing programs that are making them money and they don't feel they need college. Again, when you think that the student today is going to college strictly to make money, if I can make it without going, then why bother to go? I think that's one reason. We actually, there was a study not too long ago to show that we have more females alive than we have males alive. I don't know if drug use has done that, jail has done that, you know, what has done that, but they're just not here.
You don't think there's any general disparity in the treatment of males versus females currently in high schools and in colleges?
Oh, I'm sure this starts in elementary school when you know, you have more minorities and more minority males in special education classes than you do females, for example. Then I'm sure that impacts it as well. There are a lot of things along the way, but I think that even for a lot of those students who have been identified as special education and, you know, through school, are still going out being productive in the workforce, and they're deciding that school was not high on my list of things, and so I'm not going to do that. My own son was identified as special ed for math, and he got out of high school and he got his associate's degree, and then he says, why do I want to go to college to get a job making $25,000 when I can go sell real estate and make much more than that, you know, every year? So you can't argue with that kind of thing. I can't, anyway. You might be able to. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your comments.
My pleasure.
I'd like to bring in another piece that is a potential hurdle for transfer students, which is that the scholarship structure at four-year institutions is built on a premise more of entering freshmen. So I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on, given your current position, if there's any thinking about how scholarships might be restructured to help this particularly economically vulnerable, often economically vulnerable population.
Sure. There are a lot of states that have started putting in money specifically for transfer students. There are businesses that have put in scholarship programs. I think it's the way there's no formula that I have run across that works at every institution. The first thing that has to happen is a recognition that transfer students have used a lot of their federal financial aid, and because our costs are more expensive than most of the community college costs, we're going to have to do something in order to augment their federal financial aid because there's not enough of it left. So the first thing you have to do is to recognize that you've got that issue here. And the second is that your institutional fundraisers, there's a word for them, are actually going out asking for the establishment of scholarships specifically for transfer students. You shouldn't get in trouble with Title IX for that one, because that's either male or female, so it doesn't discriminate on any of the protected categories, but it's specifically for transfer students. The fact that they'd be taking fewer hours also has, an impact on their ability to pay, because they could be working and doing it as well. But just for the institution to recognize that they need some more money for transfer students to augment the federal financial aid they get, based primarily on the fact that tuition is higher, is the first step. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say, because, for example, we may not think that a, say $1,200 or $1,500 scholarship means a lot, but it does for them. That's one less extra shift they have to work that week that they instead could spend on their academics, which seems to be particularly important given what you said. Thank you.
The other thing is to focus on need-based scholarships rather than merit-based scholarships. Most institutions, want to reward students who are academically performing very well, which I have no problems with that. I benefited from that. But we also have to accept the fact that you're going to have an average student who still needs money to go to school. And so to base it on need rather than on merit is a shift sometimes in the mentality, but is something that would help a larger percentage of students. Or both, yeah. Is she just holding the mic?
She's holding the mic.
Okay.
I have a question, Belle.
Oh, thanks.
I was interested in the topic that you told us about, that some industries or some companies are starting to offer summer opportunities for faculty members to get some real-world experience. And I could see where that could be really attractive to a number of our faculty, particularly our lecturers and folks who might have summer opportunities to make some more money. So could you share one or two examples of that type of situation that you've heard about? What type of industry, what type of company, and maybe we can think about developing that kind of relationship here.
Yeah, I don't know the curricular offerings that you all have here. I have made the assumption that you're a traditional liberal arts institution with not necessarily as many occupational technical offerings. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But I have seen it work more in those institutions, especially community colleges, where there are hands-on skills programs, nursing, x-ray tech, machine tool, welding, automotive tech, all of those kinds of things. And even if you have management programs into which those students feed, it would still be helpful, I would think, for you to know what it is that they're doing on the floor to know how to help them perform better in those particular options. But that was mostly, those are the ones with which I'm most familiar. The Norfolk Naval Shipyard, for example, that does a lot of welding, a lot of machine tool programs, they have that kind of program. There's engineering company in Lynchburg that I know did that for faculty when they were there. I've been away from the campus long enough that I can't tell you who's still doing it, but I know that they're still going on. The, wow, acronym soup. There is a national organization that represents a lot of those industries that I'll find out who it is and get you the contact for it, that are helping to do that as well across the country. Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you for the invitation. Have a wonderful semester and stay warm.
Thank you very much for your time and your wisdom, and we just have a little memento for you to take home to remember Towson by.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.